What's up, y'all? I'm gonna jump right in. So over the last 2.5 years, I've been on this process of maneuvering through the real estate space as a lender, as an investor, asset manager, and so forth. And over the last 2.5 years, I've been able to connect with close to 150 investors, okay? And they all have expressed interest in borrowing money of some type, okay? And I've put them through the pipeline, got them connected with at least one or two or more of my lending connections. And of those 150, it's actually less than 150, but of those close to 150, can you guess how many lending closing transactions we've done? Well, I'll tell you, it's close to 30. It's actually under 30 loans that we've been able to do for close to 150 potential investors, okay? So I bring that up because in today's session, I want to take a deeper dive into capital and funding for real estate investing, okay? So it's similar to, there's different terminologies, and I like to reframe and look at things a little bit different. I got my notes here, of course, and basically it's private capital real estate strategies. You could also refer to it as real estate capital investment methods, okay? Because there's different types of funding and financing for real estate professionals, okay? So, and I just want to clear some things up to hopefully help you and help other people out there who want to borrow, they want to leverage, they want to do investing in real estate of some type, but they need to get a better handle on what they can do, how they can access the capital, and how they can get through that process, because there's a lot of misunderstandings, there's a lot of misconceptions, there's talk of, no money down, and using none of our own money. Other people's money is a common term that's been around for years, so we're going to get into that a little bit today. By the way, it's Monday, September 8th, 2025. For those that don't know, my name is Luther. I'm a real estate pro here in the Kansas City market, doing financing, investing, okay? And we do creative real estate transactions as well, okay? But as I mentioned, over the last few years, I've taken a deeper dive into funding and financing, primarily because it's what I needed to do in order to grow my enterprise, in order to grow my real estate investing portfolio. And along the way, as the market has shifted, I saw a greater need, okay? There's just some things that didn't make sense to me, and I didn't really care for how a lot of real estate investors and even lenders present the opportunity and really get borrowers and investors to understand what they need, or perhaps what their backers, okay, their backer is their money person, or perhaps what they and their business partner or their team is going to need in order to even acquire a property, let alone getting through a rehab project or a refi or a resale and so on. And so on my channel, I talk a lot about capital strategy and operations for real estate investing. It all ties together. And today I want to, of course, talk a little bit more about the capital, okay? So, and this is just stuff that comes up every day, every week, throughout the year. So I'll talk about some of the stuff that I've been facing, and to get people to kind of understand where there may be an opportunity. So a big thing that I encourage capital investors or people who are interested in investing in real estate, who actually have capital ready to go, readily available, liquid capital that they can deploy. They may have it, or someone close to them may have it. A big thing that I have been encouraging them to consider, especially as of late, is to not even think about them investing. I want them the capital investors to think more so along the lines of being a backer, as I mentioned before, or being a private money lender, okay? And there's a lot of reasons I say that. Part of it is market conditions, and part of it is my belief system along with my experience as a former property manager, as a real estate broker, as an asset manager, and as an investor, going through, the last 10 to 15 years. A key part of it is knowing what's going on in the economy, knowing what's happening financially with interest rates, and really it goes deeper into specific markets, okay, regions across the globe, and in our case, in the US, okay? So that's a key point when you are looking at placing capital or you're looking at investing capital. We need to know what's happening in that market specifically, okay, from people who are on the ground, professionals who are moving and shaking, operating in that market. Not necessarily so much what you hear on my YouTube channel or on someone else's, space on social media, but you're really gonna have to, take the time to dig in and figure out what's what and what's happening before you get the ball rolling, okay? And if you don't have the time or the willingness or the capacity to do that, then you need to plug in with somebody like me, or plug in with somebody who, again, is an operator who's moving and shaking in that specific region or market so that you can get through the process more efficiently, okay? So that's a key part, knowing what's going on, okay? How much capital is available to deploy, okay? And then what are the terms of its usage, okay? Because right now, things are strange across the globe. There's a lot of volatility. We don't know what's going up and what's going down in some cases. And so you really are gonna have to dig in, especially now as things are a little wild. Before, years ago, we wouldn't necessarily have to preface things as much because we had easy money, right? And low interest rates, and construction costs weren't as high, and things seem to flow a little bit different, okay? And so now things have shifted, like I mentioned before. So I mentioned, knowing what's going on in that market, okay? Understanding the capital that you have or someone close to you has available. And then, based on the terms, the conditions, the cost of that money, okay, then you can figure out, okay, what's a good strategy, okay? What's a good way to deploy that capital? And then even beyond that, as I mentioned before, the operations, that's key. You got to have someone on the ground or someone on your team who has a vested interest in serving either your residents or your borrowers, serving the property manager or the contractor or the tenants and residents, and serving the people along the way, because there's a lot that goes into real estate, let alone borrowing money and doing renovation or construction. And on top of that, a lot of times investors want 100% funding and they don't really know what that means, and it's short-term debt, and you're dealing with some investors are using adjustable rate mortgages, or they have short-term debt that's interest only and it has a balloon on it, or maybe a balloon that comes due in 6 months or 12 months or 2 years or 5 years or whatever the case may be. So that's just on the funding side, and not to mention the construction. And then, as I mentioned, that's part of the operations and management and so forth. Okay, so, and again, for the capital investors out there, look, in today's market, like depending on what you're looking to do, private lending is a huge play right now. I spoke with another mentor of mine just last week, and we were discussing some things. I sent him a lead. It was an off-market opportunity, potential foreclosure type of thing. And of course, I got to asking him some questions about what he sees in the market, what he's working on, and so forth. And he told me point blank, most of the money that he's making right now is coming from his lending, his private lending outfit, okay? And he told me that he has a few $1,000,000 out on the street that he's loaned to investors, okay? And of that few million, about half of it is for single family homes. The other half is for multifamily and some commercial as well. And, you know, a light bulb switched. It's like, wow, this is the stuff that I've been talking about for the last 2-3 years. And some of it is finally starting to come to fruition, okay? And that, you know, again, for those capital investors, those people who have access to capital, before you just decide to start an entity and use leverage and invest out of state and take on renovation projects in this time that we're in, before you decide to do that, you may want to look at private lending and how you can make that happen. And definitely refer back to some of my previous videos where I dig in to the documentation, okay, how you can structure that, the forms that you use, and how you can kind of move through that process, okay? So that's just one example from a mentor who's been investing for the last, I think, 8 to 10 years. At one point, he had over 260 units. And now, today, in third quarter 2025, most of his capital is coming from his lending outfit, okay? So that should be a sign to some of y'all out there, okay? So another situation that came up recently, actually just today, one of the individuals who I got connected with a private money lender last month reached out saying that he's got a deal in the pipeline and he's looking for funding. And I had to ask him, how did it go with the private money lender with whom I got him in contact with, right? And he's the borrower, the potential investor. I say potential because this would be his first time actually borrowing money to do a real estate transaction and investment. And I'm trying to caution him, okay, because he's been finding deals, he's been doing quote unquote wholesaling, he has some experience as a contractor, and he's plugged in with some construction crews, which is fantastic. But for him to say that he wants 100% financing, I sent him a text message back. I said, look, bro, like, I literally got you plugged in with one of my best local private money lenders. He told me how it went, the lender that is, but I wanted to see what the investor or borrower had to say about it. And he wanted 100% financing, meaning that he wanted the lender to not only fund all of the purchase, but all of the renovation costs too. And I want to dig into that a little bit because you got to understand when you're using other people's money, there's opportunities, of course, but you have to be mindful because there are a lot of sharks out there. And I do know of more than one private money lender who has used private lending to grow their investment portfolio, because you got to think about it. Like, there's a Bible verse, I don't know what it is. It talks about the borrower being slave to the lender. I'll have to look it up and maybe I'll quote it on a future YouTube video. But that's what I think of. That's what I thought of. And it's how I've felt sometimes when I've used other people's money, not really thinking about it so much beforehand. You got to understand, if somebody's going to fund your operation, they're either a shark, as I mentioned, they're either a partner and you don't know it yet, or they're your co-owner. Like, because if they're funding it, you for sure got to know that they have been around the block, maybe, right? If they're offering 100% financing, you got to question that a little bit and think about, okay, what's the catch? They are going to own that property. If they're not a shark, perhaps they are. If they're not a partner, they pretty much own that property. Even though, right, we could talk about control, we could talk about ownership, we can talk about who holds the deed, but again, who has the funding behind that, okay? Because control and ownership, you know, a lot of it comes down to the capital. So in my case, how I look at it and how I encourage some of y'all to look at it now is if you can get the funding lined up beforehand, and I've mentioned this multiple times on live streams, on social media, Facebook, Instagram, okay, and I've mentioned it on previous YouTube videos. If you can get it set up beforehand, before you find that deal, and you have the agreement set up, or the joint venture partnership, or the entity, whether it's an LLC or some kind of business. Most people have no business, pun intended, doing real estate investing. But if you get that straightened out with your capital investor, with your relationship backer, with your capital investor, with your money backer, whatever you want to call it, and then you come up with the game plan during that process, the agreement, the entity, the strategy, okay, the capital, the strategy, then the operations, right? It's gonna help you tremendously, because it's 80+%. I'm guilty of it multiple times over. We put the cart way before the horse, and we end up finding what we think is a good opportunity on paper, right? And then we get it under contract, and then we end up scrambling, or having to scramble and sweat and put ourselves under a lot of pressure trying to find the right type of backing. And that is back to the shark scenario. They're gonna see the blood in the water. They're gonna smell you however many miles away. And again, you think you got the deed, you think you own that thing, but whoever's backing you has control. And when they fund that opportunity, whether you realize it or not, there's some deeper psychological, mental, emotional stuff that is happening. And when things come up, or when things go south, there's a good chance that you may not be owning that property after all, whether it ends up in a default situation, or worse, a foreclosure where they have to take the property back, or you may have to restructure the note, or have someone step in and buy you out, or it just is a thing that now, again, Q3 2025 is happening more and more. So I'm just saying, y'all, okay, so that's the second scenario, right? That's fresh, just happened today. I mentioned the scenario with my mentor, who is telling me about how his business is going. He's got millions of dollars invested, millions of dollars on the street that he's loaning. The second scenario with a potential investor or wannabe investor, no offense, right? Of one of the 140 or 150 people who I've filled the pipeline with, trying to figure the thing out, who wants 100% financing, okay? And then the third scenario I'm about to talk about, where it is a colleague of mine. He reached out yesterday, and he has, and I've spoken with him over the last couple years. He's an investor, owns a bunch of property here in the Kansas City market, owns a nonprofit as well, great guy. He has capital that he wants to deploy, and he has expressed interest in becoming a private money lender. And I said, okay, well, and then along with that text message, he sent me a text message yesterday expressing interest in being a private money lender. And then he asked me a question saying, what's the minimum amount? I said, okay, I'm thinking to myself, that's a great question. Like, okay, so I said, look, and you got to keep things in mind. We're here in the Kansas City market. Most of the action that investors and lenders see or participate in is C-class single family homes. For whatever, for good or for bad, that's where most of the action happens. That's where most of the money gets turned. C-class and some B-class single family homes for lenders and investors. Okay, it is what it is. So in and around Kansas City, okay, some of those might be bottom of the barrel. Some of them might be a couple notches higher. Of course, I like to play in a little bit nicer areas, higher price point sort of thing. But I told him, I said, look, $50,000 to $100,000 minimum, all right? And you got to understand that you're going to need to leverage that, or whoever you're loaning that money to is probably going to be leveraging that with some other type of funding, or perhaps another mortgage. It just is what it is. And again, if you can figure this out on the front end, right, it's going to save you some time and some energy, some heartaches, some headaches, some sleepless nights, and some stress Or you could do like I did and stop doing, right? And you could do like what 80 to 90% most investors are doing right now. They're finding the deal, they find a lender or a shark or an owner or a partner. It could be a future owner, right? Who's loaning money, right? On that C-class property that might be 100 years old and on the outskirts of one of the worst parts of town. Just think about it, right? Okay, so the investor gets the loan from the hard money lender. Just the name alone sounds funky, right? Hard money loan, go figure, right? So they get the hard money loan, and then they end up having to come up with additional capital anyway to get through the renovation project, to pay the lender the interest, okay? And then they're not quite underwater, but in order to refinance and keep it, they're gonna have to come to the table with money. Or if they do want to just flip it, right, and sell the property, they may walk away with nothing, break even. They may walk away with 5, 10 grand, or in some sad cases, they may lose money. Hopefully they paid themselves to operate because they didn't make no money on that deal. All right, so that's just kind of the thing that happens. It's happening more and more as we speak, right? And so the lender, the third scenario that I was talking about, my colleague, okay, who owns a nonprofit, he has liquid capital to deploy. He's expressed interest in becoming a private money lender. I explained to him that $50,000 to $100,000 may very well, in most cases, be second lien position. Okay, so do some homework, check out my past videos, use AI and ask it, what are the different types of funding and financing that's available for investors? I've done that few times. How are mortgages, what are the different types of mortgages available for investors? What is a hard money loan? Okay, what is a strategic way that an investor in 2025 can use capital to more safely and securely invest and grow their real estate portfolio and to grow their cash flow and their wealth? Because that's what most of us want, right? Figure it out. Ask yourself what you really want, why you're doing all this, because it's a lot of work. Okay, so that 50 to 100 grand in not all cases, but if you're doing a significant amount of volume and you want to do more than 1 or 2 or 3 deals in a year, then that 50 to 100 grand is probably going to be in second lien position, right? Or you may have to set up some type of agreement or joint venture partnership to minimize the risk and limit the exposure, okay? Unless he just knows that he wants to grow his portfolio by loaning, unbeknownst investors or would-be investors money. I don't know. It's not how I want to roll, but I'm just saying. So the lender, okay, I said 50 to 100 grand second lien position. There may be opportunities that you can get into for maybe 5 to 10 grand, maybe 10 to 50 grand. But again, it might be second lien position or some type of, I don't know, worse, third lien position. Okay, look that up. What is a first lien position mortgage? What does it mean to be in second lien position? What is a wrap? What is a contract for deed? What is a note? What is a mortgage? And how does that work in the state where I'm investing or wanting to invest? And it's going to open up your eyes and you will see why lenders, why mortgage companies, why financiers operate the way that they do. Okay, so 50 to 100 grand, 10 to 50 grand, you might be lucky and maybe get in first lien position, but odds are going to be that you'll be in second lien position or worse, right? Unless you set it up a different way. Joint venture partnership, I mentioned that I talked about on another video. I'll probably do another video in the future for that. Okay, going long term. If you have to be short term on your loan and you want it back in 6 to 12 months, perhaps longer, you may end up with a property in your investment portfolio, okay? Or you may end up being an accidental investor who initially was supposed to be a lender, or unless you're a shark, maybe that was your plan, and then you want to add it to your portfolio and become a landlord. Okay, cool, do that, all right? Otherwise, if you want to loan money in and around Kansas City, single family home investments, and you want to be in first lien position, you're gonna need, and you don't want to be in necessarily bottom of the barrel, or maybe you're okay with C-class properties. If you're going a notch higher, like what we prefer to do, and we prefer to go long term because It's safer, it's more secure, less risk. You got to think about what's going on in the market, how much capital you can deploy or invest, what are the terms of its usage, okay? Come up with your strategy from there, right? And then you got to understand the risk factors, okay? Because using other people's money, investing in real estate, it's a business. And a key part of that, besides wanting to make a boatload of money, right, is limiting exposure and minimizing risk. And if you do that and you do it over the long term, you're gonna make out pretty darn well, assuming that your strategy is solid for the time that we're living in, right? And that your operations are on point, okay? So the point here, the third scenario, my colleague, if he wants to loan money, if he just has to be in first lien position and he has deep enough pockets to do it, or perhaps he's okay doing 1 or 2 or 3 in a year, you're gonna need a good $150K to $250,000 or more. Maybe 100 grand or less in some situations. But overall, what I've seen for the last few years, okay, and in fact, it's gone up. And again, I've done some C-class investments. Most of mine that I hold now are B-class, okay? Our all-in amount for purchase and renovation, okay, has been around $150,000, okay? So, and it's gone up since then. It's because to get in the entry, in a lot of cases, to buy product is more. And then, of course, cost, the, construction cost has fluctuated and gone up, okay? And it leads to a whole other thing, okay? So I could go on further, but I know, I don't want to take up too much of your time. If you've made it this far, I appreciate you dearly. Definitely check out the past videos where I talk about, funding and financing, strategy, different ways to deploy capital, and then operations, serving the people that help you run the business, operations, overseeing renovation projects, overseeing a property manager, collecting, making sure bills are being paid, that sort of thing is all part of the operations. And I talk about that on this channel. Track me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn as well. And again, if you have a need here in the Kansas City market, our network, okay, handles real estate in general. So even if it's just your primary residence, okay, you need a good contractor, you need short-term debt, or you need a property manager type of thing, feel free to reach out, because it's not going to be me that handles all of that, but I can get you plugged in with some of the service providers that I've used on a regular basis and some other individuals that we know, like, and trust in our network. All right. So again, thank you for tuning in. Have a great day. Peace.